Of all modern methods of execution, the electric chair is the one that gives me the most chills. It's not about what they tell you about it, but rather what they keep hidden. From the early 20th century, it was propagated that riding the lightning was a humane, quick, and painless way to die. They told the public it was scientific progress, an escape from the barbarity of the gallows or firing squad. But that's a lie. Perhaps you're thinking, these guys killed people, so why should we care if they die humanely? I understand that thought, but in the United States, the death penalty is not designed to torture, at least in theory. It's simply ending a life. Therefore, the method of execution is considered to be as humane as possible. But in reality, the reality is a completely different story. Let me take you on a journey. A journey into the mind and body of a man in the final moments before high-voltage electricity courses through every cell in his body. I'll tell you about a real execution, one that is still mentioned today as proof of the cruelty hidden behind the golden veneer of scientific progress. On April 22, 1983, John Lewis Evans III, 33 years old, walked out of his death row cell for the last time. It wasn't voluntary. The guards escorted him through the long corridor, their footsteps echoing on the cold concrete floor. Evans knew where he was going. The waiting room wasn't large, and it even felt stuffy, like a living tomb. One wall was a large bay window frame, but it was covered by curtains to keep him from seeing the faces on the other side, and perhaps also so those faces didn't need to see him yet. The blue-white fluorescent lights illuminated the room, creating an eerie contrast with the tomb-like cold atmosphere. This is not the light of life. This is the stage light, the stage of death. The night before, Evans was granted the final privilege of a dying man, a last meal of his choosing. He chose surf and turf, a tender steak served with shrimp and fries. A rather subtle choice compared to other bizarre requirements in American execution history. Some people just ask for a clod of earth. Some people just want a few fried bologna sandwiches and orange juice. But Evans? He wants to taste the flavor of life again. Meat, fresh shrimp, crispy potatoes, things your digestive system won't have time to process. Evans is the type of person who likes to act cool. For many years behind bars, he cultivated the image of a man without a care in the world. A cold, indifferent man who was even willing to provoke death. But on that day, in April 1983, that mask began to crack. Behind it was a person trembling, afraid of death. You're about to meet what you call your creator, but not in the way you imagined. The electric chair waiting for Evans had an ironic name, Yellow Mama. It was painted a garish, almost offensive yellow. For most people, yellow is a symbol of sunshine, spring flowers, and joy. But for the condemned, that yellow color was like a silent mockery. Look here, this yellow color isn't for you. It's not sunlight. This is the color of the electric spark about to erupt above your head, the color of the flame that will scorch your flesh in agony. The interesting and also ironic thing is that this Yellow Mama was built by a prisoner himself. In 1927, Ed Mason, a man serving a 60-year sentence for grand larceny, used his carpentry skills to build this death chair. Mason was once a master carpenter, and now he has turned his skills into a tool for the destruction of his fellow human beings. Imagine a vampire turning against its own kind to become a vampire hunter. That's Ed Mason. And that vibrant yellow color? It turns out it doesn't have any great significance. It was simply one of the few paint colors available in the prison at that time. Behind the execution room's curtain, Evans was being prepared by the staff. His head is shaved bald. A skull-shaped electrode is taped tightly to the top of the head. Several other electrodes, moistened with conductive gel, were placed at various locations on his leg. And then the waiting game began, perhaps the most brutal period. Every death row inmate clings to a fragile hope that they will be saved at the last minute. A call from the state governor, a stay of execution. Can you imagine that feeling? Sitting there, the clock ticking, adrenaline surging and crashing like a raging sea, your stomach twisting so tightly you feel like throwing up. But the phone never rang. Evans's heart must have sunk to the depths of despair when he realized no one was coming to save him. When the final curtain was raised, Evans saw them, the faces on the other side of the glass. A small group of observers, including several journalists, were staring at him. They studied the strained face of the dying man, and they must have been surprised, because this man looks completely different from the Evans they saw at the trial. At the trial, Evans almost admitted to the jury that he deserved to die. He even threatened to kill each of them if they didn't sentence him to death. He declared that he could never be rehabilitated, that he would forever be a threat to society. Those were provocative statements, the words of a man who would rather die than live a lifetime behind bars. But now, as Evans sat in the yellow mama, tightly bound with leather straps, his head and legs fitted with damp electrodes, observers must have wondered, did he regret those words? A sponge lightly dampened with salt water was placed on Evans's head. This is an important step. The damp sponge will help conduct electricity better, minimizing the risk of burns and prolonging the pain. He was invited to perform the final ceremony and say goodbye. His words certainly shocked at least some people in the room. "I have no ill will toward anyone," Evans said, his voice trembling. "I don't hate anyone. No more provocation, no longer a threat, just a man standing at death's door, trying to find a little final peace." A black hood was placed over his head, obscuring his face. That moment must have sent a surge of adrenaline and ice through Evans's veins, an action that made reality undeniable. He's about to die. There's no way to escape anymore. At exactly 8:20 p.m., the first wave of 1900 volts of electricity was passed through his body. 30 seconds. That's the time designed to end a human life. But something was wrong. Too much time had passed since the sponge under Evans's helmet was moistened with salt water. It was almost completely dry. Furthermore, the electrodes on his legs didn't contain enough conductive gel. There are a few minor mistakes, but in this context, they are the difference between a quick death and a living hell. The observers smelled it first, a nauseating, pungent smell of burnt hair and meat. It's a little sweet, but mixed with the toxic smell of melting plastic. Evans's head was shaved bald, but the fine hairs scattered across his body were melting down to the pores. And then, suddenly, flames erupted above his head. The flames didn't stand still. They danced, spread down to the base, sometimes skipping over vast areas like a strange, swirling tornado. Evans jumped and struggled. His body arched, then suddenly collapsed, giving the impression that he was dead. His hand curled into a stiff fist, as if his knuckles were being cooked, losing moisture, causing them to shrivel like scorched dry leaves. That's the position he'll eventually die in. But not now. The hood on his head seemed to be starting to get holes. From there, the electric sparks erupted like chaotic fountains. John Lewis Evans III accidentally turned into a 4th of July fireworks display, a live firework, exploding and screaming in agony. After a period of waiting, the two doctors carefully examined Evans, and they revealed a horrifying truth. He was still alive. His heart was still beating. The lungs were still trying to breathe. The partially charred electrodes were reattached to his legs, and a second electric shock wave was triggered. A thick gray cloud of smoke rose and spread through the air. More sparks. The fire raged more fiercely across his hood and legs. Now, the smell of melting clothes was seeping out of the execution chamber. Observers were forced to cover their noses with their shirts. Some had to turn away, unable to bear the sight before them. 10 seconds into the second electric shock, another smell appeared, the smell of roasting meat, the smell of Evans' meat being fried crispy like breakfast sausage. It's a bit fishier than the typical smoky aroma of barbecue ribs and hamburgers, and it was further complicated by the smell of rusty metal, perhaps a result of his still-living system releasing proteins, causing capillaries to bleed onto the skin's surface, and those drops of blood quickly being burned away by the heat and fire. After another period of waiting, Evans was checked again for the second time. And once again, the worst possible news, he's still breathing. His heart is still beating. An urgent request was sent to the state governor seeking clemency due to the unusual pain Evans was suffering. It turns out that even the strongest supporters of the death penalty would find it difficult to watch a murderer, no matter how cold-blooded, endure such a long and torturous frying session. But to me, this is ridiculous. This man, at this moment, wants nothing more than to die. All the burns he suffered, along with internal injuries, will continue to cause him hell, even without any more electricity being put into his body. In my opinion, it would be much more cruel and unusual to expect him to survive for a few days after that treatment. He was going to die anyway. It's just dying in prolonged agony. Request denied. At 8:40 p.m., 20 minutes after the first jolt of electricity, the third jolt was passed through the battered body of John Lewis Evans III. This time, his body barely reacted. The meat is charred. The clothes had melted and stuck to his skin. The acrid smell was so strong it was hard to breathe. The current once again flowed through every cell, every nerve fiber, every muscle tissue. Evans' stubborn heart, the heart that had beat strongly through so many years and so many crimes, finally surrendered. It stopped beating. The lungs stopped trying to breathe. The brain stopped sending signals. At 8:44 p.m., the doctors finally declared him dead. 24 minutes. That was the time from the first electric shock until John Lewis Evans III was officially declared dead. 24 minutes in hell. The observers left their seats. Some steps were slow, as if their legs were heavy. Their faces were pale. A few people wiped sweat from their foreheads, even though the room wasn't hot at all. They had just witnessed a death they would never forget. Some will carry that image in their dreams. The screeching sound of electricity, the smell of burnt meat, the flames danced above a person's head. They left, some permanently psychologically scarred by this gruesome performance. But the biggest question remains: did John Lewis Evans III lose consciousness after the first electric shock? When he collapsed after the first 30 seconds, did that mean he lost consciousness? The answer, according to the two doctors who carefully examined his body after each attempt, is uncertain. But there's evidence to suggest he might still be conscious. Electric shock essentially completely seizes your movement. It takes over your muscles. They're stiff. Your joints are contracting. You lose control of your bowels and bladder. But none of this means you're unconscious. In fact, many people have survived accidental electrocutions, and they recount that they remember every detail vividly afterward. Initially, they believed they had lost consciousness immediately, but as time passed and memories returned, they realized they could vividly recall the detailed misery of the hell they had experienced. That's probably just the brain's defense mechanism, a form of psychological shock that temporarily hides memories. Some people are truly fortunate to become unconscious immediately. Some just look like they're unconscious, like Evans. But the reality inside could be completely different. Perhaps Evans felt everything, felt his flesh burning, his body roasting, excruciating pain coursing through every nerve, felt his heart beating erratically as if it were trying to climb up his esophagus to escape. And for those 24 minutes, there was no way to call for help. Words cannot express the pain. He could only lie there, tightly bound, while his body slowly burned away. That's the reality of the electric chair. It wasn't a quick, humane death like they promised. It's a form of torture disguised under the veneer of science and progress. The electric chair is really nothing more than a wooden chair. They are often equipped with straps and handcuffs. It's a common misconception that the chair itself does all the killing, but in reality, it's the electrodes that deliver death. This method of execution requires preparation similar to a surgical procedure. Can you imagine how the absolute feeling of anxiety and panic will increase as you go through the entire process? The night before this event is when you are allowed to have your last meal, if your state allows it. The day of execution will be filled with periods of activity interspersed with long periods of waiting. And it's precisely during those moments of silence that your mind will race and anxiety will creep from your stomach up to your throat. Your head and feet will be completely shaved bald. This is done to ensure that the electrode pads stick directly to your skin. Any hair, including fine hairs, can create resistance to the electric current being transmitted, prolonging this entire uncomfortable experience. Both day and night will seem to pass by 1 second at a time, slowly. Today, executions are often carried out after midnight, making the wait a special kind of torture. When the time finally comes, you will be called out of your cell and led to the execution chamber. There, you will see the wooden chair waiting to send you to a fiery death. You will be asked to sit down, and shortly after, leather straps will be fastened around your arms and legs. You'll realize you can barely move. Next, cold and waxy electrodes will be placed on your head and feet, sending a cold shiver down your spine. Then, a sponge soaked in salt water is placed on your head and held in place by a cap. The final piece of this gruesome puzzle is a blindfold or hood that obscures your face from observers. It's for their sobriety, not yours. When the voltage starts, your eyes might pop out of their sockets, and who wants to see that? At this point, you might hope to be finished and over it, but you're not quite there yet. You will be read the execution order and have the opportunity to make your final statement. It's best to speak quickly. You will be given the final rites, and it is finally time to begin. Now, your execution begins. The first electric shock is the strongest. It can range from 1600 to 2500 volts. This is meant to make you unconscious. Unfortunately, because electricity captures your movement, you might look unconscious even when you're not. Next is a less powerful electric shock intended to cause fatal damage to your heart. If you're lucky, it will succeed on the first try and you'll end up perfectly toasted. But if your sponge is dry or the electrodes don't have enough gel, a lot can go wrong. The worst outcome is catching fire. If that happens, it will be no less unforgiving than being burned alive at the stake. After the first shock round, 5 minutes will be put on the clock. This allows your body to cool down enough for the doctor to check your vital signs. If they're still there, it's time to go again. Electric shock not only brings a range of pain, but also a series of disgusting sensations. The feeling like you're about to throw up your heart is one of them. Electricity is very harsh on your heart muscle. Its heartbeat will become irregular and fast. It can jump into a dangerous state of arrhythmia before giving up completely. Of course, with the electric chair, that's somewhat the point. The heartbeat will become irregular and dangerous. This creates the sensation that it's crawling up your esophagus only to slide back down repeatedly. It seems to be trying to crawl further, like a frantic spider trying to escape a sink full of water. Additionally, there are a few factors that trigger oxygen deficiency, meaning there isn't enough oxygen for the organs and tissues. Your body and the fire will produce carbon monoxide gas if the execution goes wrong. The flames that erupt will consume the oxygen around you that your organs need. This can make it feel like your head is swelling, getting hot and pounding. The only thing is, in this case, your head is really getting hot. Not to mention that this amount of electricity will actually start cooking your internal organs and flesh from the inside out. I can't think of anything more terrifying than smelling your own burning flesh. I mean, feeling like you're being cooked isn't exactly a pleasant picnic. Electric shock is a well-executed and direct attack on your nervous system. Your nerves have very little resistance to electricity, which means they will essentially lie down and sacrifice themselves as prey for the volts. This leads to blinding and traumatic pain. Your nerves can also be a bit out of control sometimes. This can essentially lead to them sending incorrect signals to your brainstem without any meaning. These sensations can include the feeling of cool water on the skin, a strong tingling sensation, a deep itch or prickling feeling, or the sensation of tiny creatures crawling all over your arms and legs. Electric shock can also be fatal in a very unexpected way. Strong electrical shocks can completely disrupt your brain signals. They can also directly damage tissue, and this can happen in all areas. If it damages the area that controls bodily functions like breathing, breathing will cease. The cause of death could be asphyxiation. Although when it comes to executions, death is the goal, so I guess this isn't too shocking considering the average length of electric chair executions is 7 minutes. That really shows how much suffering can be endured. Of course, we know that the full 7 minutes weren't filled with transmitted volts, but it still sounds terrifying. For all those reasons, I consider this the most painful method of all modern executions. It's not because it was designed for torture, but because when it fails in the most terrifying way imaginable. And it failed many times. Too many times. John Lewis Evans III was just one of many who experienced hell on earth in their final moments. Behind the dazzling yellow paint of Yellow Mama, behind the promises of a humane and scientific death, lies a bloody truth. Sometimes we are still burning people alive, just like in the Middle Ages. We're just calling it by a different name.